by a God that says that a rape victim should have to be wed to her rapist.
If you want to tell me where that's at, we can pull it up and look at it, because God is not condoning rape.
This one says, if a man happens to meet a virgin who is not pledged to be married and rapes her, and they are discovered, he shall pay her father 50 shekels of silver. He must marry the young woman, for he has violated her. He can never divorce her as long as he lives.
Back up just a couple of verses. It says, but if a man finds a betrothed young woman in the countryside, and the man forces her and lies with her, then only the man who lay with her shall die, but you shall do nothing to the young woman. There is the young woman no sin deserving of death. For just as when a man rises against his neighbor and kills him, even so is this matter. For he found her in the countryside, and the betrothed young woman cried out, but there was no one to save her. It says, if a man finds a young woman who is a virgin, who is not betrothed, and he seizes her and lies with her, and they are found out, then the man who lay with her shall give to the young woman's fathers 50 shekels of silver, and she shall be his wife. Because he has humbled her, he shall not be permitted to divorce her all the days of his life. This doesn't say anything about him forcing himself upon her or her crying out like that other verse did. Basically, she's giving consent and they're lying together, and he's saying in that instance then they should actually marry one another.
So unfortunately, this reasoning is misinformed and simply incorrect. If you consult the biblical scholarship on this passage or these passages, you'll see that this is in fact a rape scenario. So here are the commentaries that I consulted on this. Some of these are more advanced in terms of the critical scholarship involved. Some of them are more intermediary, but they universally and collectively confirm that these two scenarios together, and in particular the second one, is in fact a rape scenario wherein the victim has to marry her attacker. Now, the problem here that's not really addressed is the fact that the reason the attacker isn't given a greater punishment in this case is because in the second scenario, the woman is not betrothed. And so, accordingly, in this cultural context, there is no offense against another male party. So in this case, as with many of these cases, the woman is simply treated as an object. And the only reason that her attacker is not punished to the same extent as the previous passage where the woman is betrothed is because there is no other man who, in some sense, takes a loss because of the woman's betrothal. And so that's why the father gets a payment and the woman ultimately ends up with a man that had done this terrible thing to her. So ultimately, this is unfortunately a case where the woman is not really taken into consideration. Her experience and her feelings, they don't really matter in this law or this context. It is the transaction, in a sense, between these two men that matters most. And that's why the particular consequences are given as they are. Now, the reasoning that's provided here is, again, it's simply misinformed. But the problem really is that it attempts to sanitize, morally sanitize, these sorts of things that we see in the biblical text. And the reality is that the context here is so different from our own that we can't viably make an attempt to salvage the sort of moral problematics in a case such as this. For anyone that really wants to utilize the Bible for any sort of value, one really has to contend with these sorts of difficulties. The reality here, as we can see confirmed by a variety of biblical scholars, is that this scenario can't be condoned in the way that this particular apologist is trying to spin it. It's just not really taking into account the actual facts of the matter. He even states that these two scenarios use different sorts of language, or at least indicates this, and that's not the case. In both cases, it says that the man seizes the woman. So there's no reason for us to suggest that in the first case it would be rape, and in the second case it would not be. It's the same thing happening in both scenarios. So this sort of apologetic move is just, again, an attempt to create something that really isn't there. This speaker even starts out by saying, let's read this whole verse because I know that God is not condoning rape. So he's basically assuming his conclusion before he even sees the evidence at hand. And when he reads through it, he sort of creates this post hoc rationalization for what's going on here. And that happens far too often in apologetics. This is something that indicates an anti-intellectual approach and ultimately a biased one. So sadly, this scenario in these passages is unfortunate, and it is not one that we can sanitize very easily or maybe even at all. And so we have to contend with this sort of thing. In particular, people who want to utilize the Bible for some sort of value have to take into consideration the details and the matters such as this that simply don't jive well with what we consider or claim to be our worldview in this moral sense.